The call came at 3:17 a.m. I remember the exact minute because I had been staring at the clock since 2:43, watching the red numbers change with the same dull rhythm I used to monitor my children's fevers when they were small. Marcus was on shift. He had been on shift for 14 years, ever since we got married at 22, ever since he walked into the fire academy with his father's badge in his pocket and his mother's rosary around his neck. I had learned to sleep through the sirens. I had learned to wake up when the phone rang, but this call was different. The voice on the other end was not Marcus, joking about the meatloaf at the station. It was Chief Darnell, and his voice sounded like someone had reached down his throat and rearranged his vocal cords. "Sloan," he said, "you need to sit down." I didn't sit down. I stood in our kitchen in the dark, in the house we had bought with the down payment from my father's life insurance, and I listened to him tell me that the warehouse fire on Industrial Boulevard had collapsed, that 5 men were inside, that they had recovered 4 bodies, that the 5th, my husband, my Marcus, the father of my children, was unaccounted for. Unaccounted for, I repeated. The word felt strange in my mouth, like a food allergy I didn't know I had. What does that mean? It means the structure collapsed before they could get out. It means the fire was too hot. It means Chief Darnell stopped. I heard him breathe, a wet, ragged sound. It means we can't recover him, Sloan. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I didn't cry, not then. I stood in the kitchen and I looked at the calendar on the fridge, Marcus's shift schedule, highlighted in yellow, the shift that should have ended at 8 a.m. I looked at the coffee maker, still warm from the pot he had made at 6 p.m. the night before, the one he had poured into his travel mug with the fire department logo. I looked at the note he had left on the counter, back by breakfast. "Love you more." I still have that note. I keep it in the drawer where I keep my embalming scissors. I read it sometimes when I need to remember what a lie looks like in handwriting. My name is Sloan. I'm 42 years old. I'm a funeral director at Hartley & Sons in Cleveland, which means I spend my days preparing bodies for viewing, dressing them in clothes their families choose, painting their faces so they look like they're sleeping instead of dead. I have buried 347 people. I have comforted 400 widows. I have learned to say I'm sorry for your loss in 17 different tones, depending on whether the widow is crying, screaming, or staring at me with the blank eyes of someone who has already left their body. I never thought I would be the widow. Welcome to Little Bunny Stories. If you're new here, my name is Sloan, and this channel is where we tell the truth about the people who promise forever and vanish at the first sign of smoke. If this is your first time listening, hit that subscribe button. We post stories every week, real stories, hard stories, stories about women who stopped organizing other people's grief and started claiming their own. Here's my story. I organized Marcus's funeral myself. People thought I was brave. So strong, they whispered at the wake, watching me adjust the lilies on the closed casket, watching me greet each firefighter in his dress blues, watching me hold my children's hands while they cried into my black dress. She's planning her own husband's funeral. I could never. They didn't know I had no choice. Hartley & Sons gave me the week off, but I couldn't stay home. I couldn't sit in the house where Marcus's coffee mug was still in the sink, where his boots were still by the door, where his smell, smoke, and Dial soap and the cologne I bought him every Christmas still lived in the fibers of our couch. I needed to work. I needed to prepare him. I needed to make him perfect, one last time, even if there was no body to prepare. The casket was closed. Of course it was closed. Chief Darnell had explained, gently, that the fire had been too intense, that the collapse had been too complete, that there was nothing to recover. I didn't ask questions. I was a funeral director. I knew what fire did to a body. I knew that sometimes there was nothing left but ash and bone fragments, and that sometimes even those were lost in the rubble. I knew that a closed casket was not unusual. I knew that a memorial service with a photograph and a flag was enough. I chose the photograph myself. Marcus at 35, at our daughter's confirmation, smiling with his whole face, the smile that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. I chose his uniform. I chose the prayers. I wrote the eulogy, though I didn't deliver it, Chief Darnell did, his voice breaking on the word brother, and I stood in the front row and I didn't cry. I didn't cry because I was working, because I was organizing, because I was making sure that every detail was perfect, that every flower was fresh, that every guest felt the weight of their loss reflected back at them. I was good at my job. I had always been good at my job, and now my job was to bury my husband. The insurance paid out quickly. $2 million. Marcus had increased the policy 6 months before the fire, a detail I found in his desk drawer while searching for his birth certificate for the death certificate. I didn't question it. People increase their policies. Firefighters worry, it's normal. I used the money to pay off the house. To set up college funds for our children, Elijah, 16, who wanted to be an engineer, Naomi, 14, who wanted to be anything that wasn't me. To donate to the firefighters' widow fund. To buy myself time. Time to grieve. Time to heal. Time to become the woman everyone expected me to be. The brave widow, the strong mother, the funeral director who had buried her own husband with grace and dignity. I became her. I wore black for 6 months, then navy, then charcoal. I returned to work. I held widows' hands and told them it would get easier, that the pain would become manageable, that one day they would wake up and remember their husband's laugh without feeling like they were drowning. I said these things and I believed them because I had to believe them. Because if I didn't believe them, I would have to admit that I woke up every morning and reached for Marcus's side of the bed and found it cold, and that the coldness felt less like absence and more like something else. Something I couldn't name. Not yet. 2 years passed. I buried 9 to 7 more people. I held the hands of 9 to 7 more widows. I watched my children grow. Elijah got into Purdue. Naomi started wearing eyeliner and listening to music I didn't understand. I went to therapy. I went to church. I went to the cemetery every month to place flowers on Marcus's empty grave, because there was no body, because the city had erected a memorial stone for the 5 firefighters lost in the Industrial Boulevard fire, and Marcus's name was carved in granite, and I needed to talk to something. I talked to the stone. I told it about my day. I told it about Naomi's grades, about Elijah's girlfriend, about the funeral I had organized for a man who died alone in a motel room and had no one to claim him. I told it about the dreams I had been having, dreams where Marcus walked into our kitchen, covered in soot, and said, "It was a mistake, Sloan. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave." I told the stone everything. The stone never answered. That was the point. And then, on a Tuesday in November, everything changed. His name was Harold Vance, 73 years old, found dead in a Motel 6 off I-90 3 days after his heart stopped. No family, no emergency contact, just a wallet with $40, a bus ticket from Tampa, and a bottle of blood pressure medication that hadn't been refilled in 6 months. I handled the intake myself. I always handled the unclaimed ones myself. There was something about them, the loneliness of their deaths, the silence of their lives, that made me feel responsible. Like if I didn't prepare them with care, if I didn't dress them in clean clothes and comb their hair and make them look like someone had loved them, then no one ever would. I was going through Harold's personal effects, standard procedure, looking for anything that might identify next of kin, when I found the second wallet. It was hidden inside the lining of Harold's jacket, sewn into a pocket that had been stitched shut. Cheap leather, worn at the edges. I opened it with my embalming scissors, careful not to damage anything inside. The license was expired, 4 years out of date, but the face was unmistakable. Marcus Cole, my husband, the man I had buried 2 years ago. The man whose name was carved in granite. The man whose empty grave I visited every month with flowers and prayers and the dreams I couldn't explain. The photo on the license was older, he looked younger, thinner, with more hair, but it was him. The scar through his left eyebrow from the bicycle accident when he was 12, the small mole on his right cheek, the eyes that had looked at me across our kitchen table for 20 years and said, "I love you more." I sat down, hard. The chair in the intake room was metal, cold, and I felt it through my skirt like a warning. I opened the rest of the wallet, more photos. Marcus with a woman I didn't recognize, blonde, young, maybe 25. Marcus holding a toddler on a beach. Marcus smiling at a birthday cake with candles. Marcus alive. The dates on the photos were printed on the back. 6 months ago, 8 months ago, a year ago. Marcus had been alive for 2 years after his death. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I sat in the metal chair and I looked at the photos with the same professional detachment I used to examine bodies for signs of trauma. I noted the details. The Florida license plates in the background of one photo. The Daytona sign on a t-shirt. The woman's name, written on the back of one photo in Marcus's handwriting, Bethany. Leo's first steps. 14 months. Leo, 14 months. Born while I was organizing Marcus's funeral. Born while I was crying into my children's hair. Born while I was becoming the brave widow, the strong mother, the woman who had buried her husband with grace and dignity. Marcus had a son. Marcus had a new family. Marcus had faked his death, abandoned his children, and started over in Florida while I was sleeping in his t-shirts and talking to his gravestone. I put the photos back in the wallet. I put the wallet in my pocket. I finished preparing Harold Vance, carefully, precisely, the way I prepared everyone, and I drove home in silence. I didn't tell anyone, not that night, not the next day. I went to work. I buried people. I smiled at widows and told them it would get easier. And every night I sat at my kitchen table and I spread the photos out like a hand of cards and I looked at my husband's new life. Bethany, I found her online. It wasn't hard, Daytona Beach. Waitress at a seafood restaurant called the Crab Shack, active on Facebook. Photos of her boyfriend Mark, not Marcus, because of course he changed his name, and their miracle baby Leo. Photos of beach trips, of birthday parties, of a life that looked exactly like the life we had 20 years ago before the children and the mortgage and the shifts that kept him away for 48 hours at a time. Mark was a contractor, traveled for work, was away 2 weeks a month. Bethany posted about how hard it was, how much she missed him, how grateful she was for the generous life insurance that allowed her to stay home with Leo. Life insurance. I went to my desk. I found the policy documents. I read them again, carefully this time, with the eyes of a woman who had been lied to instead of the eyes of a grieving widow. The policy was for $2 million. It had a double indemnity clause for accidental death. Marcus had increased it 6 months before the fire. He had also added a provision, small print, easily missed, that the payout would be made in installments, with the final payment due on the 5th anniversary of his death. 5 years. He had planned to disappear for 5 years. Long enough for the investigation to close. Long enough for me to stop looking. Long enough for him to collect the final installment and vanish with Bethany and Leo to somewhere without extradition. But there was something else. Something I had missed, in my grief, in my trust, in my desperate need to believe that my husband was a hero who had died saving strangers instead of a coward who had abandoned his family. The policy had a fraud clause. If the death was found to be fraudulent, if Marcus was discovered to be alive, the payout would be void, and I, as the beneficiary, would be required to repay every dollar, with interest, and potential criminal charges for insurance fraud. Marcus hadn't just abandoned me. He had made me a criminal. He had made me complicit in his disappearance. He had left me holding $2 million of stolen money, with my fingerprints on every deposit, my signature on every form, my grief on every record. If I went to the police, I would go to prison. If I told the insurance company, I would lose everything, the house, the college funds, the life I had built on his lie. My children would lose their future. I would lose my freedom. Marcus had thought of everything. He had always been good at thinking of everything. That's what made him a good firefighter, the ability to see 3 moves ahead, to anticipate the collapse before it happened, to plan the escape route while everyone else was still running toward the flames. He had planned his own escape. And he had used me as the foundation. I didn't confront him. That was the first thing I decided. Confrontation was what women did in movies. They showed up at the new girlfriend's house. They screamed, they threw things, they demanded answers. I was not a woman in a movie. I was a funeral director. I knew that the most powerful thing you could do to a person was not to yell at them. It was to make them disappear. I spent 6 months planning, 6 months of watching Bethany's Facebook, 6 months of learning Mark's schedule. He visited Cleveland twice a year, always in March and September, always for business. I tracked his flights. I followed him from the airport to a bar on West 25th, where he sat in the same corner booth, facing the door, drinking the same beer, watching the same baseball game on the same television. He was careful. He paid in cash. He used a rental car. He never stayed in the same hotel twice, but he was also predictable. He had been a firefighter for 14 years. He liked routine. He liked knowing what came next. It was his strength and it was his weakness. I didn't approach him in the bar. I didn't want him to run. I wanted him to stay exactly where he was, comfortable, confident, invisible, while I built something around him. Something he couldn't escape. I started with the death certificate. It was easier than it should have been. I was a funeral director. I knew every clerk in the county medical examiner's office. I knew which ones were overworked, which ones were underpaid, which ones had gambling debts or sick parents or exhusbands who wouldn't pay child support. I didn't bribe them with money. I bribed them with favors, free funeral services for their relatives, discounted cremation packages, the kind of professional courtesy that builds relationships in an industry built on death. I found a John Doe in the county morgue, unclaimed for 3 months. White male, mid-40s, approximate height and weight similar to Marcus's. Died of an overdose in a park. No family, no identification, no one to miss him. I had him transferred to Hartley & Sons. I embalmed him myself. I was careful. I studied photos of Marcus, old photos from before the fire, from our wedding, from the children's christenings. I recreated the scar through his eyebrow with theatrical makeup. I shaped the hairline with prosthetics. I dressed him in Marcus's old uniform, the one I had kept in the attic, the one that smelled like smoke and dial soap, and the cologne I had bought him every Christmas. He didn't look exactly like Marcus, but he looked close enough for a closed casket viewing, close enough for a death certificate, close enough for the system to say, yes, this man is Marcus Cole, he is dead, officially. I filed the paperwork on a Monday. By Wednesday, Marcus Cole had a second death certificate. By Friday, he was in the county database as deceased. By the following Monday, his social security number was flagged, his driver's license was canceled, and his estate, what was left of it, was in probate. I didn't stop there. I contacted the insurance company, anonymously through a lawyer I hired with cash, a lawyer who didn't know my name. I told them I had information about the Marcus Cole policy. I sent them documents, the original fire report, the unaccounted for status, the lack of recovered remains. I suggested they might want to investigate before the final installment was paid. They investigated. They found the second death certificate. They found the body in Hartley & Sons, my body, my John Doe, my perfectly prepared fake. They concluded that Marcus Cole had died twice, which was impossible, which meant the first death had been fraudulent, which meant the policy was void. They didn't prosecute me. I was the victim, after all. The grieving widow. The woman who had been deceived. They simply sent a letter, formal, legal, final, informing me that the remaining installments were canceled and that I was required to repay the amounts already received. I didn't have the money, not anymore. I had spent it on the house, the college funds, the life I had built on his lie, but I had something else. I had the house which was in my name. I had the college funds which were in trust for the children, and I had a plan. I sold the house. I moved into an apartment above the funeral home. I transferred the college funds to accounts the insurance company couldn't touch, and I waited. The funeral was on a Saturday. The same church where we had been married, the same priest who had blessed our union, the same flowers, lilies, white, the flowers I had chosen for his first funeral. I sent invitations, not to Bethany, to his parents who still lived in Cleveland, who still visited his grave every Sunday, who still told stories about their heroic son at church socials, to his brothers, to his firefighter friends, to everyone who had attended the first funeral, who had given me their pity, their casseroles, their admiration for my strength. They came, all of them. They came because I called them personally, because I told them I had news about Marcus, because I knew that curiosity was stronger than grief. I stood at the door of the church, dressed in black, my children's hands in mine. I greeted each guest with the same professional warmth I used at work. Thank you for coming. It means so much. He would have been touched. When his parents arrived, his mother in the same black dress she had worn 2 years ago, his father leaning on a cane that hadn't been there before, I hugged them. I smelled his mother's perfume, the same gardenia scent she had worn since I met her, and I thought, you raised him. You taught him to run. And now you will watch him fall. The casket was open this time. Not fully, just the upper half, the way we did for viewings where the deceased had suffered trauma. I had prepared the body myself, every detail, every brushstroke, the scar, the mole, the hairline. It wasn't perfect. But in the dim light of the church, with the lilies scenting the air and the organ playing Amazing Grace, it was enough. His mother looked at the body and she gasped. She reached for my hand. Sloan, she whispered, I don't understand. We buried him. 2 years ago, we buried him. I know, I said. My voice was steady. I had rehearsed this. I had rehearsed it the way I rehearsed eulogies, the way I prepared bodies, the way I organized every detail of every funeral I had ever conducted. I thought we had 2, but I found him, Margaret, in Florida, in a motel, alone. The police said he had been living there for years, under another name, with another family. I paused. I let the words land. I watched her face crumple, watched his father's cane slip, watched the confusion turn to horror, turn to something worse than grief. He had a son, I continued, a little boy named Leo. He's 3 now. He was born while we were planning the first funeral, while you were crying at his grave, while I was becoming the brave widow. I walked to the front of the church. I stood beside the casket. I looked out at the faces, the firefighters in their dress blues, the neighbors in their Sunday clothes, the children who had grown up with my children and didn't understand why they were here again. I want to tell you about Marcus, I said. The real Marcus. Not the hero, not the saint. The man who planned his own death. Who increased his life insurance 6 months before the fire. Who paid someone, I don't know who, I don't know how much, to make sure the warehouse collapsed in exactly the right way. Who walked out of that fire while his friends burned. Who took a bus to Florida and started a new life with a waitress named Bethany while his wife was choosing his casket. The church was silent, absolutely silent. I could hear the radiator hissing. I could hear someone crying, not Margaret, not yet, but one of the firefighters, a young man who had idolized Marcus, who had joined the department because of him. He didn't die a hero, I said. He died a coward. And I am burying him today, properly, officially, legally, so that his children will know the truth. So that his parents will know what he did. So that no one will ever call him brave again. I stepped down from the podium. I walked past Margaret, who was collapsed in her husband's arms, sobbing now, the ugly sobs of a woman who has lost her son twice. I walked past the firefighters, who were staring at the casket with expressions I couldn't read, anger, betrayal, grief, all mixed together. I walked out of the church into the October air and I didn't look back, but I wasn't done. I had sent Bethany an envelope, not an invitation, she didn't deserve an invitation. Just documents, the death certificate, the photos from the funeral, a letter typed, no signature, Marcus Cole died today. Officially, legally, his life insurance has been voided. His pension has been cancelled. His social security number has been flagged. He is a dead man walking and he has nothing left to give you. You are the mother of his child. You are also the victim of his fraud. The choice is yours. She came to the funeral. I knew she would. I had timed the delivery for the morning of the service, knowing she would drive through the night, knowing she would arrive just as the service ended, knowing she would find the church empty except for the family who had no idea who she was. I watched from across the street from my car as she ran up the steps in jeans and a sweater, Leo in her arms, her face streaked with mascara and rage. I watched her burst through the doors. I heard her screaming before I saw her, "Where is he? Where is Mark? Where is my husband?" And then I saw her standing in the aisle holding Leo while Marcus's mother stared at her with the blank confusion of someone who has been hit too many times. "Who are you?" Margaret whispered. "I'm Bethany," she screamed. "I'm Marcus's, I'm the mother of his son. I'm his wife. I'm his." She stopped, because she wasn't his wife. She never had been. She was the woman he had lied to the way he had lied to me. She was the other victim, the one I had used as a weapon, the one I had aimed at his family because I couldn't aim at him. I didn't stay to watch the rest. I drove away. I went back to the funeral home. I prepared for Monday's service, a grandmother, 9 to 3, surrounded by great-grandchildren, and I tried not to think about Bethany, about Leo, about the woman I had become. Marcus found out 3 days later. He tried to use his driver's license at a bank in Daytona Beach. The teller ran it through the system. The system said, deceased. She called security. Security called the police. The police ran his prints. His prints came back as Marcus Cole, deceased, fraud suspect, do not detain, contact insurance investigator. He ran. Of course he ran. He was good at running, but he had nowhere to go. His bank accounts were frozen. His credit cards were canceled. His generous life insurance was gone. Bethany had changed the locks, filed a restraining order, called the police to report a dead man who was harassing her and her son. He tried to contact his parents. They hung up on him. They had buried him twice. They couldn't survive a third time. He tried to contact his brothers. They threatened to call the police. He tried to contact me. I let the phone ring. I listened to his voice, the same voice that had said I love you more, the same voice that had called from the station to say he was safe, the same voice that had lied to me for 20 years, and I deleted the message without listening to the end. He ended up in Cleveland. Where else could he go? He had no money, no identity, no one who would help him. He slept in shelters. He ate at soup kitchens. He stood on street corners with a cardboard sign that said veteran, anything helps, because he still had his old fire department jacket, the one I hadn't used for the fake body, the one he had taken with him to Florida. I saw him once, 6 months after the funeral. I was driving home from work, late, dark, the kind of night where the streetlights flicker and the shadows move, and I stopped at a light on Euclid Avenue. There he was, on the corner. Thin, unshaven, his jacket too big, his eyes the same brown they had always been, the same brown I had looked into on our wedding night and believed I could trust. He didn't see me. He was looking at the cars, at the people who wouldn't make eye contact, at the city that had once called him a hero and now wouldn't give him $1. I watched him the way I watched bodies in my embalming room, with professional detachment, with clinical curiosity, with the understanding that death comes in many forms. Marcus wasn't dead, but he was gone. The man I had married, the father of my children, the hero in the photograph, that man had never existed. He had been a costume, a performance, a lie that I had believed because I needed to believe in something. The light changed. I drove away. I didn't roll down my window. I didn't give him money. I didn't say goodbye. I had already said goodbye, twice. The first time with love, the second time with justice. There was nothing left to say. My children know now. Elijah is 19 at Purdue studying engineering. Naomi is 17, applying to colleges, wearing eyeliner, listening to music I still don't understand. I told them last year, on the anniversary of the second funeral. I sat them down in the apartment above the funeral home, small, clean, no memories of Marcus except the ones I chose to keep, and I told them everything. Their father didn't die a hero. He chose to leave. He chose to start a new family. He chose to make us criminals and victims and the subjects of his lie, and I chose to make him pay. Not with violence, not with the police, but with the only weapon I had, the truth, delivered precisely, surgically, at exactly the right moment. Elijah didn't speak for a long time. Then he said, "You should have told us sooner." I couldn't, I said. I needed to protect you. I needed to protect myself, and I needed to make sure he could never come back. Naomi looked at me with eyes that were exactly mine, dark, sharp, seeing too much. "Do you regret it?" she asked. The second funeral, making him homeless, destroying him. I thought about the question. I thought about Marcus on the corner, in his too big jacket, with his cardboard sign. I thought about Bethany, who had sent me a letter, not angry, just exhausted, saying she had moved to Ohio, that she was working 2 jobs, that Leo asked about Mark sometimes and she didn't know what to tell him. I thought about Margaret, who had stopped going to church, who sent me cards I didn't open, who had lost her son twice and couldn't survive a third time. "No," I said. "I don't regret it. I regret that I had to do it. I regret that he made me into someone who could. But I don't regret the act itself. He was already dead. I just made it official." Elijah nodded. Naomi reached for my hand. We sat there, the 3 of us, in the apartment above the funeral home, surrounded by the silence of the dead and the quiet breathing of the living, and I thought, this is my family now, the one I chose, the one I protected, the one that survived. I still work at Hartley & Sons. I still bury people. I still hold widows' hands and tell them it will get easier. But now when I say it, I mean something different. I don't mean that the pain goes away. I mean that you learn to carry it. You learn to use it. You learn to transform grief into something that looks like strength, even if it feels like armor. I started a program at the funeral home. For widows. For women who have been left, by death, by abandonment, by the slow erosion of love into indifference. We meet once a month. We drink bad coffee. We talk about the practical things, insurance, wills, the paperwork of grief, and then we talk about the other things. The anger, the betrayal, the dreams where they come back and you can't decide whether to hug them or hit them. I don't tell them my story, not the full version. But I leave a note in every program, printed in small type at the bottom of the page. The person who left you made a choice. You get to make the next one. Sometimes when I'm alone in the embalming room, I take out Marcus's note. The one from the kitchen counter, back by breakfast, "Love you more." I read it, I fold it, I put it back in the drawer with my scissors, and then I go back to work. Because the dead don't bury themselves, and the living deserve someone who will help them carry the weight. I'm Sloan. I'm 42 years old. I'm a funeral director. I buried my husband twice, once with love, once with justice. I have 2 children who are learning to trust again. I have an apartment above a funeral home that smells like lilies and formaldehyde. And I have a note in a drawer that reminds me every day that love is a choice, and so is leaving, and so is staying, and so is the decision to build something new from the wreckage. If you're listening to this, and someone you loved walked away while you were still holding on, if they faked their death, their feelings, their commitment, their presence, I want you to know, you don't have to chase them, you don't have to forgive them, you don't have to become the villain of their story just because you stopped being the victim. You can bury them, metaphorically, legally, however you need to. And then you can walk away into the light, into the next chapter, into the life they were too cowardly to stay for. You are not the grave, you are not the stone, you are not the flowers that wither, you are the funeral director. You are the one who decides what gets remembered and how and by whom. See you in the next story.